I want to start by thanking Alonso for being here, and also to the Institute of Latin American Studies, the Center for Mexican and Central American Studies, the Department of History at Columbia, the Latin American Film Center of New York, and in particular, Cordelia Slansky and Ana Martinez for organizing this meeting. No? A cop movie is now out in Netflix. It's off to a great start this year. It won the Silver Bear for Outstanding Artistic Contribution for editing for Gibran Aswad at the Berlin Film Festival. It was a Critics' Choice Documentary Awards nominee for Best Cinematography by Emiliano Villanueva. It has been in several festivals, Copenhagen International Documentary Festival, Camden, San Sebastian, AFI Latin American Films, London, and Morelia. And well, this is not a surprise if you know the trajectory of Alonso Ruizpalacios, who directed Güeros in 2014, Museo in 2018, a beautiful short called Café Paraíso in 2008, several episodes, TV, Narcos Mexico, and has also worked as a stage director in Mexico and London. His movies show a clear vision, a sharp sense of humor, a broad range of emotions, but also a search for ways to tell a story that avoids narrative conventions. His movies, including this one, help us see things in different ways. And I think here I should mention also the producers of the movie, who participated in a research process that started, I think, like 4 years ago, if I'm correct. Yeah,
that's right.
I'm talking about Elena Fortes and Daniela Alatorre, and also Alexandra Zapata. No? So I'm really glad to be here and to be able to speak with Alonso because of his work, but also because I'm a teacher, and I think that movies like these help my students and all of us see things in different ways, challenge kind of the conventions. I work on crime in the 20th century Mexico, and it resonates, the movie, with some of the things that I found for earlier periods of the history of the country. So let me start like from the general, and then we'll have some more specific question. It's a movie about police officers in Mexico City, which is a difficult idea to start with because, anybody who knows the police force in Mexico City, there are 34,000 uniformed preventive police officers, know that they don't fit with the stereotypes of the heroic cop that we've seen in movies. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, Alonso, is, how did you decide to take on this difficult, subject, something that you knew was not going to work according to the standards and the expected stories, that one can see in films? It must have been very difficult also because I imagine you, being from Mexico City, must have an impression of the police that is not always very favorable. I live there, and I had to suffer the police sometimes, so I imagine you share that experience too. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that precisely was sort of the starting point, what we think of when we think about the police, and knowing that we have a shared feeling about the police as Mexicans, and so the idea was to take the audience through a journey that we took when we started investigating this. But so just to go back a little bit to where the need to tell this came from. We started working on this project about 4 years ago. It was the end of President Peña Nieto's term. It was coming towards the end of his term, and the corruption was at an all-time historic high, and we knew that it was, I mean, I guess that was the main subject that was on everyone's mind, the corruption and impunity and the link between these two, and how they contribute to everything else that what we felt was wrong with our country at that moment. And so Daniela, Elena, and I got together with the idea of, making a film that somehow went beyond entertainment, and we wanted to put a little, our little bit out there to I don't know, contribute somehow. And so we started talking about how to approach this such a broad topic, as corruption and impunity, and we started. Daniela and Elena got a hold of research from an institute called IMCO that deals with corruption statistics in Mexico, and they had this great file of stats from 1 year in the state of Morelos. Mm-hmm. And originally we were going to focus the film on that corruption in the public ministries. I don't know, how do you say ministerios públicos in English? I always forget the term.
The prosecutor's office, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's the prosecutor's office. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we started developing the film in that way, and then very soon came to realize that we always ended up talking about the police. That was what was most interesting to us, the figure of the policeman, and kind of all the roads led to the police. And because it was the most exciting, the most interesting, and also the most, to be honest, the most filmic, the most cinematographic. And cinema has always had a love affair with cops. And so it was kind of natural that's where it went. And so we decided, okay, let's stop fooling ourselves and let's make it about the police force. There was one of the deterrents, I think I remember now, was there had been a kind of a famous attempt at making a documentary about the Mexican police that we started to hear about as we started doing our research. And some people were like, well, this Mexican documentary filmmaker who did Presunto Culpable.
Oh yes.
I don't know what that's called in English, but Presumed Guilty, I guess. Which is a very powerful documentary and was a very important documentary in its day. He had been working on a documentary about the police for years, and so he had kind of come to the realization that it was an impossible task, to try to do something. And so that was a red flag that we had, like how are we going to avoid this mess? Because as we started investigating, it's a Pandora's box, it's so vast, the topics, the angles that you can take. There's so many stories as well, that it's quite daunting. So I think it was until we met Teresa and Montoya, we started interviewing cops. And when we met Teresa and Montoya, we were like, okay, yeah, that's the movie. Yeah. It was like love at first sight. And then from then everything was, I wouldn't say easier, because none of this was easy, but it kind of, the path was clear, I think, from that moment.
Yeah, I really want to talk about them, but before that, I just wanted to point out one thing about the movie that impressed me. The way it explains and shows corruption is very interesting. I mean, you see money going from hand to hand in small amounts, tips, bribes, mordidas, as we call them, because that's how they have to work, basically. It's, in other words, I mean, I think that what you show in the movie is that if we talk about corruption in a strictly moral terms, we don't understand what happens, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, obviously the topic of corruption, as I say, it was the starting point and the relationship between corruption and impunity. But then as soon as we started delving into the cops' lives, other topics that were far more interesting than corruption, I think, sprang out. But we had like a personal commitment to engage with that problem and to portray it. And it's very difficult to portray, because it's in Mexico, it's absolutely all-sided, you know. It runs in all directions.
Yes.
And so it's quite difficult to wrap your head around that, to explain it to a foreigner, to explain how corruption works and how much it's normalized and it's part of the daily life. One of the first things that one of our advisors, our key advisors, this project, we were very lucky that we had some of the best minds in working in the police reform in Mexico right now. And one of them, Ernesto Lopez Portillo, who was with us throughout throughout all of the making of the movie, actually. One of the first things he said to us was, when you start to understand Mexican cops, you're going to see that the Mexican police officer does the moral and the immoral thing on the same day.
Yeah.
He is both a crook and some kind of an urban hero in the same day, and it's really hard to wrap your head around that.
Yes, no, and you know, the two cops that you interviewed, Maria Teresa Hernandez Cañas and José de Jesús Rodríguez Hernández Montoya, no? They were fantastic because they had a very clear vision of that. They understood it, you know, how life is so difficult for them, but also the, you know, kind of the moral ambiguities of being a cop on everyday basis, right? And they could tell the story very well, right? I mean, so I imagine that must have been, you know, something that was very important in the process of conceiving the movie, right? I mean, finding them and hearing their voices, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the you know, the most important thing was to once we found them, once we you know, once we formed a relationship, developed a relationship as collaborators, because I think this movie is very much a collaboration. It was essential that the story was told with their voices. So that's where this idea of using the actors to portray them, but keeping their voices and doing all that lip sync came about. And that's what it was very important to me because they have a way of telling their stories that is at the same time very funny and sad, and it's quite unique to me.
Yeah, I mean that playing with the voices that you have in the movies is fascinating, because they lip sync the interviews, right, with Teresa and Montoya.
That's
but
right.
Also they are telling the story and sometimes lip syncing each other, right? I mean, Montoya is moving, so that you know, that play with the expectations of the voice and the actor was something that I think helped understand not only the depth of their stories, but also the way in which, you know, being a policeman in the city, you know, forces you to act, to perform, you know, your role. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was actually the sort of the starting point to take this approach. Once we discovered that policemen and women in Mexico are performers, you know, and that the uniform is a costume of sorts, you know. There's one diary entry that Monica says at one point that to me is very revealing, that she says that she realized halfway through the process that policemen and women are the most vulnerable people playing the part of somebody strong with authority, you know. So in a sense, they are badly prepared actors.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Well, the movie has also that part. I mean, it's about these police officers, but also about the actors who play them. And you know, as far as I understand, it's a very interesting process because the two extraordinary actors, Mónica del Carmen and Raúl Briones, they started preparing for the movie by training to become cops, right? I mean, even before there was a script for the movie, right?
Yeah, the process was, I mean, it was quite an undertaking. They agreed to come on this movie without really knowing what was going to be asked of them, other than, I want you to train to you know, to go into the academy, and we're going to somehow record that, and then we're going to do a process where you're going to play these cops. But I didn't share the script with them, and the reason was that I didn't want to taint their acting process. I want them to, because we were going to register all of that, so I wanted them to enter into that training process completely free of any sort of acting purpose, you know. I wanted them to just go into it and discover their path along the way. And so when the time came to for them to do the lip sync, for them to perform Teresa and Montoya, they already had a very deep knowledge of what it being a cop entails, you know. So I think it's when they're doing when they're playing those characters and doing the lip sync, I think it's more than a technical thing going on there. I think there's really like a very deep character construction for
Okay, kind of. Oops, I think I lost Alonso. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Really? I can hear you.
Okay, for a second, maybe it's probably my Wi-Fi here. And they also, you know, the actors perform in front of people, in front of other policemen, in front of a crowd in the street. You know, they're already testing and embracing those roles as policemen, you know, through the movie, right?
Yeah, well, the training period for the actors, yes, involved you know, being in the police academy for for a couple of months, and then they patrolled, joining an older, a more experienced, a senior policeman or woman. Yeah, so that was quite scary. And yeah.
I mean, there's some scenes in the movie that are, yeah, very compelling. I mean, one thing that I really appreciated is this is a movie about the city. I mean, you see the city at night as it feels dangerous, but you also see how people use the city in public, you know, how, you know, the crowds can challenge order, you know, in the city.
Yeah.
You can see also the importance of the neighborhood, of the barrio where they're coming from. They tell us that story, but also you can see the kind of the intimacy of the home, right? I mean, it's also a very important part of the movie. One question that I asked is, because your other movies also are very much about the city, but do you think that, you know, looking at the city through the perspective of a police officer change the way you understand the city, Mexico City?
That's an interesting question. I think yes, in a way it did, because rather than change it, I think it maybe it enriched my view of Mexico City, or it challenged my view of Mexico City. But it was very much a conscious thing. At one point, it became like I realized I was making another movie about Mexico City, and then I sort of embraced that, and I you know, my sound person, the woman who records the sound, she's
fantastic.
Very, yeah, she's a great friend of mine, and she was like, "Oh, Alonso, you're gonna stick me in a car again for ages," because she did Güeros with me, and then we did Museo, which is like half of it is a road movie, I guess.
Yeah.
And then this one was, we sort of discovered this is another road movie, this time in a patrol car. But yeah, there's something logical to that, because you know, if you live in Mexico City, you spend a lot of time in your car. You know, we have a very close relationship to our cars, and then and looking at policemen and women and seeing how much time, like what the relationship to their vehicle is, to their patrol, is very interesting. It's actually fascinating, because it's a vehicle that does not belong to them, that they have to pay for, and they have to look after as if it was their own. And it's always, they're always really in dire straits. You know, the cars are always mechanically very faulty. And so it's quite interesting, yeah.
No, I that's something that, as you say, it's in a way it's a road movie that takes us to different places, you know, including Ciudad Nezahualcóyotl, but also, you know, several neighborhoods that were, you know, very familiar. One thing that I wanted to ask you about, because this is something that the movie challenges the viewers to understand, right? It is clear in the structure of the movie that at one point you said, well, we're going to play with this seems to be fiction, or this seems to be a documentary, and then it opens up as a work of fiction, and then comes back to an interview. All those, you know, that idea about the structure of the movie, was that a product of the process of filming it, or you were coming already with an idea of, you know, separating, or you know, there's a scene in the movie when suddenly the lights go off, and then we start looking at things from the point of view of the actors, right? Did that happen, or was something that you thought was necessary in order to tell the story?
It's something that I felt was necessary, but that I discovered before we started the shoot. So it's a very strange process. I mean, for me, it was very different from the other films that I had done, in which, you know, you write a script, and then you raise the money, you rehearse it, and you shoot it, and then you edit it. And this was, all the processes were like kind of running parallel to each other all the time. We were researching all the time, we were writing, and at the same time we were already shooting some stuff. So it was a very strange but very organic process at the same time. And so so the structure of the process was, we did the research first. We did a lot of research. Then once we met Teresa and Montoya, we did 4 days of interviews with them, and that was sort of the basis of the whole movie. Then I went away with my co-writer, and we transcribed the interviews, in which it was a really in-depth interviews, like going through all of their lives, their loves, their you know, their working life, their relationship to the higher command, their relationship to citizens, their relationship to corruption, you know, everything. And then we transcribed these interviews, and we made a script that we were going to shoot the lip sync of the actors doing the lip sync to these voices. So we had to edit on paper. It was very yeah, it was a very long process.
Mhm.
And then meanwhile, the actors were in the police academy, and we were recording them, doing the patrolling. And then after they finished that process, then we had them learn the final script that we had them learn the audio tapes. I didn't give them the video because I didn't want them to copy the Teresa and Montoya. Yeah, I wanted them to sort of embody them. And so I just gave them audio clips of all the bits of the interviews that we had scripted and how we had structured them. And so we gave it to them to learn. And they worked on that for many weeks, for like almost 2 months, until they got it like pitch perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, they were really they worked really hard at that. And so I had this idea that at one point we were going to, break the fourth wall, as it were, to introduce the diaries. That we arrived at that solution in the script at one point. But so when we came to shooting it, I thought this is the reaction is gonna be fake, because they know from the script that that's gonna happen, and it's not gonna be real. So I said, let's change it around, and we actually did it on a different day when they weren't expecting, with a different scene where they weren't expecting it. And I just told, the only people who knew were like the camera, my DP, and the assistant director. I told them to shut down the lights when we gave them a cue, and so we recorded that.
Surprise, it's obvious that they're surprised.
It was a real surprise, and we got the real thing, So I mention it because it's an interesting sort of example of what happens in all throughout the documentary, in which you have something that is scripted, but then it's reinterpreted, and then it's really happening. There's a lot of little examples of that. Another one would be when in the scene where in the gay pride day, Montoya, played by Raúl there, he's guarding the march, and at some point these drunks come in and start provoking him, and one of them pisses on by a tree. And so that was all scripted, but we shot it, we put the camera at a very long distance, so that we would have the real reactions of the people, and people would know that we were filming. And it worked really easy. Like, nobody questioned that was just a scene that happens in Mexico City, somebody being
obnoxious and
obnoxious, and the cop not having the tools to deal with a situation like that. Not having the legal tools, not having the proper training to know how to deal with somebody like that. And then, but the thing that wasn't scripted, that was really interesting, was that this person who comes in and says, "Are you not going to do anything about it?" It says, I live in Miami, and if you try to pull something like that, he goes, and Raúl doesn't break character, and he says, "That's right. This is Mexico."
Says, "This is Mexico."
This is Mexico, right? Yeah. And that wasn't scripted, for example. That was just like a little gift and the movie is full of those little situations where surprises, happy accidents happen.
But also, along with that combination of fiction and documentary interviews, there are moments in the movie where you really stop and look at the reality of everyday life. Well, obviously there's the birth at the beginning of the movie that I understand was an actual, delivery of a baby that was became part of the movie. But there are also other moments, like to me, something that really stuck was the hot dogs rolling in the grill of the OXXO, you know, that image is, you know, and she was looking at them and said, you know, this is life. And the other part that I think is really wonderful is the last shot, right, when she's jumping from that platform into the water. No, it's there are these glimpses of life that are really wonderful. I mean, because they put the story in the context of, you know, their lives as cops, but as people who live in Mexico City, you know.
Yeah, I think for me that was important. Like, we went through a lot of drafts and a lot of there was every little scene, I think, that has some kind of purpose about, you know, what it's telling us about cops life. And for example, the hot dog thing is, I mean, I guess it's some comment on how, you know, it's very common for cops in Mexico to be overweight and to be, because they don't have lunch hours, they don't have any official lunch hours, and they're out on the street all day, and that's their daily food is junk food. You know, that's kind of their way of living. They don't have many of them work in places where there's no toilets, and so they have to make do with whatever little deals they can make with the people in gas stations or in parking lots, or, you know, that kind of thing. So I think we went through what isn't, almost everything that is there was told to us by the policemen and women that we interviewed, not only Teresa and Montoya. So it's kind of, it's structured like that.
No, it's great. Alonso, there's a couple of questions from the audience that I wanted to read to you. One is, how much distrust or hostility did you face from other police officers and their commanders while you were filming?
I think by the time we were filming, we had overcome that mistrust, because I don't think you can embark on something like this without a previous a period of building relationships. I think that's common to most documentaries, is that you have to invest a lot of time in building relationships with the world that you are portraying. And so, like I said, we spent 2 years doing research, and then one year going to Ciudad Neza, where we shot most of the police patrolling and one of the academies. We spent many days going, many months going there before we brought a camera. You know, you can't just turn up to a place like that and bring a camera. It was a really long process of courtship and gaining trust. And I think we couldn't have done it in probably anywhere else in Mexico. I think that other than Neza, I mean, I might be wrong, but certainly not many places. And the reason is that in Neza there is a new chief of, well, not a new, he's already been there for some years, a chief of police called Amador, who's very he's very progressive and has made some serious reforms. Some have worked, some have not. But he's trying. He's definitely trying to make a difference, and so he was interested in this movie to kind of as a way to understand what his own police force is up against. And so he was surprisingly open to let us shoot without makeup, you know, without Obviously, we had to.
You can see that in the offices, when you're inside of the offices of the police. Right?
Yeah, it's very like it's very precarious, you know, what they're up against, and obviously it was a question of pushing the envelope all the time. We had to push whenever they tried to make something look nicer. We were like, no, we just kept shooting. You have to find ways, but I think by the time we were shooting in Ciudad Neza, we were quite there, but it did take a long time to build that relationship.
Okay. We have another question from Esteban Salmon, who I know works on this, and he's asking if you could say a little bit more about the problem you encountered at the beginning when thinking about doing a film about the prosecutor's office. Why didn't you find prosecutors as cinematic as cops? I know Esteban is working on that, so I mean it's a serious question. Okay?
No, I mean I think it's fascinating in its own way, but it was most of it is office work, you know. Most of it is people sitting down at desks and doing research, and so that's visually quite complex too. We did make a serious stab at that. Like we started developing a script around that, and then we just hit a wall, and everything. Every time we talked about it, we just were more interested in the primer respondiente, in the first respondent, which are the cops, and the you know, even the policía de investigación, the investigation police, and we kept just being drawn to that. I mean, I think it would be an interesting challenge to make a film about a prosecutor's office in Mexico, for sure. We ended up shooting a couple of scenes in the prosecutor's office in Neza, but we had to take them out because it kind of like took us to another universe, and also we recorded some stuff that we couldn't get released for because we recorded. Those were quite tough days, recording all of that in Neza, and just like being inside there when you see like little 14-year-olds being prosecuted for selling drugs or stuff. It's you know, and their grandmothers waiting outside, and
that was something that I, you know, my own research, what I found was when in Mexico there were jury trials until 1929. So that was very visual, that was very dramatic. It was something that could be told as a story very easily. But then the system switched to this process that is very long. It's all in an office. It's written down. There's nothing going on orally, even, you know, in interaction. So it must be almost impossible to translate into, you know, into story. Right? Because we have several other questions, and I want to try to have them all in for you. There's one question, says, I'm reading, powerful film. In your research, did you discover if the transnational nature of law enforcement intersects with the crimes against women, feminicidio, rape, and domestic violence that go unpunished? I think it's an interesting question because the movie also has a couple of references to harassment in the force, in the police force, and how to deal with it. So if you want to talk about that.
I'm trying to understand the question. The transactional nature of law enforcement?
No, transnational nature of law enforcement intersects with the crimes against women. I think that well, at least to me, the interesting part is this the kind of latent violence against women that you could see through the eyes of Teresa mainly, right? But I don't see a transnational aspect there really.
Yeah, I mean, if I understand the question, I think that there's are they asking, is the way that the police, the law enforcement falls in Mexico, are they related to crimes against women that go unpunished? Okay,
Yes.
intersect.
Yeah.
Oof. I guess they do, but in the sense that it is a very systemic. There is a systemic violence against women, and the inefficacy of the police force, the police system in Mexico, and how undertrained they are to deal with those situations. I think it completely feeds into the cycle, and it's completely, I mean, it's completely related in why there is so much of it in Mexico. The cops are, I mean, as you see in the film, they have a 6-month training period.
Yeah.
So that's very, very little, and that does not equip them to deal with situations of crime against, violence against women, I think, particularly. So yeah, I think it's very much a part of the vicious cycle that happens. And also the other aspect of it is that it's the violence towards women is completely normalized within the police force.
Within the police.
All the women, the women, the police women that we interviewed talk about harassment in such a kind of normalized way. We interviewed, by the way, many cops that aren't in the movie, obviously, but they all talk about sexual harassment and sexual abuse even as a part of their daily lives almost. Yeah.
Let me read you another question from Logan Pook. Did this film make you feel more sympathetic toward Mexican police officers?
Yes, it did. Although it made my perception of them more complex. I don't see them as victims. I don't see them as our heroes. I see them as very. I think I can't help but agree with Raul's and Monica's assessment of them, in that they are the very vulnerable people pretending to be, or put in a place where they have to enforce the law without the proper tools to do it. So the result is very, very complicated.
Yes, I mean,
but yes, I mean, the short answer is yes, of course, I did. Sorry, my kid is here.
It's okay.
See? Yeah, the short answer is it absolutely did make me feel more sympathetic, but that does not mean that I cannot see where they are at fault and how they sometimes make really bad choices, you know. Yeah, but it's impossible not to. I don't think you can see cops again after a process like this, in which you spend a lot of time with them. You understand their motives. I mean, that's one of the great things about documentary filmmaking, that it really is such a privileged tool to go inside another person's life and try to understand the world from their perspective. And also empathy, by the way, was a premise that it was. The premise was to use empathy as a tool. That's where the idea of bringing actors came. You know, it was to play the police, the real policemen, but also to exercise their empathy as a working tool, and to be sort of the avatars the audience in this journey of discovery and of getting close to or bridging the gap that exists between citizens and policemen.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that. I mean, we're almost running out of time, but you mentioned already, the need to build trust in order to establish relations and get people to talk or to have access to the world of the police. No? But also, I think that the movie is also saying something about police work more generally, in that it doesn't focus on law enforcement. It doesn't. I mean, there's a very, very good chase scene where this robber is chased down the subway and then captured by Raúl and by Montoya and Teresa. But tell me if I'm wrong. I think that one point that you're making is that by understanding the police and the way they work and their conditions, we might be able to rebuild trust in the institution, right? It is not a matter of all policemen have to be punished for doing things that even their bosses expect them to do, but to have a different relation with the rest of citizens, right? I mean, do you think that the movie can have an effect in that sense? Do you hope to open a dialogue in that direction?
Well, I certainly it is one of the movie's aims, is to start this conversation and to help bridge this huge gap of mistrust between citizens and the police force, and to that end, the movie was always thought of as it was going to be. It is accompanied by an impact campaign that is, we're right now. It's going on now that the film has opened. We're screening it in several public spaces, and we were screening it with police officers and citizens at the same time. Yeah, right now there's a tour going on in Mexico City with a Ecocinema, who they do solar powered projections, and they go around different public spaces, and so they're doing like 2 or 3 screenings a week, and it's been really great, like the response that we've been having. So it's definitely it is one of the aims of the movie to open up this conversation and to highlight all of these blind spots and weak spots that the police system has. Yeah, and I think it's. I mean, the reception that we've had so far in Mexico, it's only opened for like 2 or 3 weeks, the film, but we've received a lot of like really enthusiastic comments about just regular people who had never stopped to look at the police officers that they have in front of them, and just like wonder what their role is in the police that we have, like what our responsibility as citizens is for the police that we have.
Yeah, that's something that I'm sure that the movie can have an impact, that, as you say, if civilians see it, but also policemen can see, probably a mirror of what they're doing in the movie. That would be very interesting. I mean, the movie does several things, obviously, but one of them is to show how people inhabit the same city and face the same problems, whether they're cops or civilians. No? So one last question that is coming from the audience that I wanted to ask you, and then I will add a little bit to it. From Pamela Shainman, she asks, why do you think there have been so few films made focused on the police? And I want to add to that question. I mean, the way I've looked at detective fiction in Mexico, even noir movies in Mexico, the police is usually not the detective. The the police officer is never trusted as the point of view of the viewers who are looking for the truth and trying to understand, a crime and solve a crime. No? So it is, at least in the case of Mexico, it's very clear that it has been very difficult to see the police as the protagonist of stories, right? Because nobody will trust them, right? That's nobody would think that they're smart enough to solve a crime, right? So the question is why there have been so few films, but I guess you can answer that in a more general way if you want.
I think you answered it already. I would just add to that. I mean, I think it definitely has to do with the reality of the police and the average Mexican's perception of the Mexican police, which is not a flattering one, I think it's very interesting to compare it to the US, the view that the love affair that Americans have with the police, and now obviously it has turned the other way around, of course, with reason, for very good reasons. I think that in Mexico, it just like, actually we had originally in as part of the movie, we were going to we did a research of an edit of Mexican movies that portray cops throughout the history, starting with the cinema of the 40s and 50s, and then going and in that we were going to include that in the movie, but then it was just too much. But it was interesting to do that exercise because we saw the changing attitude towards the policeman in the representation of the cinema, and it's very clear how from the 60s, late 60s onwards, the portrayal of the policeman is always a corrupt individual who is linked to the organized crime in some way. And so I think, like you said, that it's obvious that the portrayal of the policeman in Mexico in the movies is always either that, or it's something that there have been attempts at doing like a figure of a policeman that we all know is not real.
Like Hermanos Almada kind of movies.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's very difficult to make an honest portrayal. By the way, I think it also is the case in Hollywood for sure. I think there are very few movies that portray policemen in a very honest way. There's historically it's an idealized portrayal of the lone cowboy, who kind of is a tough guy but does the right thing. And I still feel, and I'll be very interested to watch the movies that come from the Black Lives Matter movement. Like how will that
change the image of
the cop in Hollywood movies? That would be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you had been, anyone who's been in the US in 2020, especially in the summer of 2020, could see that those perceptions have changed, because people in the street, how that translates into movies. Obviously that might take time, right? But I'm sure that it will happen. That documentary, or that word that you mentioned about the image of policemen in Mexican movies, is like another documentary that you
exactly.
I don't want to that will be in itself. So one movie that I find fantastic, I don't think it's so famous, is Llámenme Mike. I don't know if
that's a great movie. That's a really cool movie.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's kind of noir, but also twisted into this craziness of being an investigator in Mexico.
Yeah, that's like it's like our Mexican Marlowe, you know, the Philip Marlowe,
Yeah,
the American character, the Chandler, Raymond Chandler.
Chandler. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we come to the end of the time that we had. I really appreciate this, Alonso, and I hope that we can continue talking. And I'm sure that there will be other opportunities. Okay, hopefully
you,
the next time in person. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be. I would like that.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being here. Bye bye.
Thank you. Take care.